know that they're not going to get any trouble. These soldiers are going to get in a lot more trouble than any of the HSBC operatives who are working with the drug cartels and the terrorists, aren't they?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out. But Atkinson actually said Friday, she says she found out that the U.S. government Border Patrol stopped a couple of the guys trying to smuggle in the Mexican citizens about a week ago. Upon their arrest, one of them spoke of other soldiers that are involved in a smuggling ring, a leader there at Fort Bliss that he said is paying them up to $1,500 a person. She also pointed out that Homeland Security has taken over the case, but does not seem to be talking about it at all. Interestingly, I don't know why, but Homeland Security took the case, didn't announce it, pretty big case, hasn't answered any questions of hers, and she thinks it's kind of baffling, she added. This is a good case in terms that they are stopped something that may have been going on inside the military. Why aren't they answering any questions? So you have Homeland Security, they've come in, they've taken it over, and now it's kind of been hidden, thrown under the rug. And
well, we know why that is.
Over.
It's Obama's policy and it's Homeland Security's policy. And they have done everything they can to subvert the immigration laws. They have told honest agents, and we've had the vice president on multiple times of the Border Patrol Union, and he says how demoralizing it is for the honest agents who want to do their job, and they're not allowed to enforce the borders because Obama and the Justice Department and Homeland Security have told them to stand down. They are paying to fly people into this country. And regardless of what happens with other branches of government, the executive branch is going to do what it wishes. They're not going to listen to anybody else. They're going to bring in a massive invasion of illegal aliens, because that's what this is. When you bring in a sufficient number, when you bring in a sufficient number of people that can't be assimilated, in other words, you can't find jobs for them, they're going to self-ghettoize in their own cultural, religious groups. And so it truly is an invasion, especially if you look at the demographics of who's coming in. It's mostly young men of military age. It's not typically families that are coming in.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time I've heard rumors of this stuff when I was in as well. You know, back in May, 2 soldiers were sentenced at Fort Hood for human smuggling. So this is the kind of stuff that's been going on for a while. Like you said, Obama's wanting it to happen. He wants those voters to come in. They want to allow Trump to come in, completely let them take a sinking ship. You know, Obama, Hillary, they've already set the charges.
That's right.
Trump's going to come in. They're going to blame it all on the conservative movement. They're going to blame it on the Republicans. And then what's going to happen? You brought in all these different illegals who are automatically going to vote for the Democrats. And then they're going to come back in like some, you know, white knight and then essentially take over, take our guns and completely enslave us.
And then we're told that this is a humanitarian issue, that we need to bring these people in because they're suffering immigrants. And yet, who created the problem there? We have yet another report, this one from the New York Times and Al Jazeera, that came out talking about how the CIA weapons for Syrian rebels are being funneled into a black market. Who knew, Joe? I mean, what have we been saying for 3 years here? And this is the way they put, this is the opening sentence of the report here that you see from the Hill. Weapons shipped to the Middle East by the CIA to arm Syrian rebels have systematically landed on the black market in Jordan. We know it's systematic. We know that this was a false flag plan. They want to create chaos in that area, just as we now see the globalists trying to create economic chaos in Great Britain. They created this physical chaos, this war in Syria, created the refugee problem, and then come back and say, well, it's a humanitarian issue, and we can't help them in country, so you have to bring them into your country.
Well, there's a possible trip in the works that I'm working on. They'll actually be looking into that black market weapon sales over in the Middle East. So, you know, keep an eye out for that. Hopefully that all goes through and that happens and I'm able to get out there and get that information, but it should be pretty interesting.
Okay, now let's talk about the UN military vehicles that are seen in Virginia. And of course, you and I went to AP Hill, where they have a place there where they are training to take over domestic cities. They have models of American cities. They have models of rural and suburban areas. You train where you fight, don't you, Joe?
Yep.
And that's what we hear from these people when they say, why are you doing these massive drills in Los Angeles? Why are you doing it? And the guy says, well, you train where you fight. If you're going to fight in the desert, you train in the desert. If you're going to fight in the ocean, you train there. But if you're going to fight in urban Western American cities, that's where they train.
I mean, it's a complete and total map. It looks like DC. It looks like your backyard. I mean, there were fire stations, banks, apartment complexes, a mosque, a church, a soccer field. This stuff is happening. And now you're seeing these UN vehicles being brought in. They're in these convoys and everyone's kind of flipping out because you watch this stuff progress. And now all of a sudden you start hearing rumors about how the UN's going to come in and bring soldiers. You saw the movie Amerigeddon. how that takes place. A lot of people are kind of upset and a lot of people are scared and they're wondering what's going on. I don't blame them.
Well, you not only see the training that's going on in AP Hill and elsewhere, but of course there's also the article that came out today from Motherboard talking about the simulation of crises and engineered food shortages. And one of the interesting things that they said that would create the food shortage in their simulations was migration. And the name of the simulation was food chain reaction. Food chain reaction, okay? They understand what they're doing. They are wargaming for this. They are physically out training with this. Now they're going down the roads with UN vehicles. They're not just hiding it in a military base inside of another military base as they did at AP Hill. This is coming out on the streets now. It's just absolutely amazing to see this unfold and to metastasize.
Yeah, it's interesting. But there's another story I want to talk about really quick that I just think is in itself kind of funny. The title says, Al-Qaeda urges lone wolves to target whites to avoid hate crime label. So you're going to single out white people to avoid being racist. I mean, that in itself is hilarious.
Maybe that's a proof finally that if anybody needed it, that this is all being run out of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean, we have a politically correct Taliban now. Al-Qaeda is going to be PC now because if they kill a whole bunch of black people, you know, then people might stand up against ISIS and then they might do something. But if they kill some white people, who cares?
Okay, stay with us when we come back. Rob Dew and Leanne McAdoo are going to analyze what happened this last week in California, this last weekend, where you had a knife attack between different groups of protesters, probably both run by the U.S. government. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You should find it very interesting that we now see member after member of the GOP establishment lining up and actively supporting Hillary Clinton. Not just saying they can't vote for Trump, but actively supporting Hillary Clinton, especially people who were part of the cabinet of George W. Bush. Here's an example. Hank Meltdown Paulson, as Breitbart calls him, cites Hillary's globalist platform as a reason to endorse her. Now, this was George W. Bush's Treasury Secretary. He presided over the meltdown of the economy. And as we pointed out earlier, when we talked about how Standard & Poor's has moved immediately to downgrade Great Britain to put pressure on them, took them down 2 notches. And of course, it took them forever. They never did it, okay, when you had the bailout, the meltdown of the economy over mortgages. But now we see the guy who presided over that, the guy who presided over the bailout, now he is endorsing Hillary Clinton. He is also, interestingly enough, a former CEO of Goldman Sachs. That tells you everything you should know by that. The connections of the Bush and Clinton establishment, they are one and the same. It is a single party. And listen to one of the key things that he likes about Hillary Clinton that he talks about. Paulson posits that Clinton would be more likely to cut Americans' Medicare and Social Security than Donald Trump would. He cites that as a top priority. So there you go. Vote for Hillary Clinton, Democrats, and get your Medicare and your Social Security cut. And you can also turn over your democracy to the globalist, to the corporate elitists, okay? We can see now the GOP truly does stand for the globalist oligarch party, but so do the Democrats. But here's another person from the George W. Bush administration. We've got Nicholas Burns, former senior State Department official with the W administration. And he quoted as this Brexit situation was developing, and they're talking about the U.S. and the U.K.'s special relationship being fundamentally altered. He quotes Henry Kissinger, and he says his famous question, who do I call in Europe? He goes, well, I think now that's going to be Germany. He says, we're now going to work to strengthen our relationship with Germany. And this is now a Democrat congressman, Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania. See, it's a single party. They're going to work together to try to get this transatlantic partnership trade deal together, even though the European Union is unraveling from the bottom. They're going to try to stop that through a fear campaign. Another Democrat says Germany will become even more dominant in the EU, said Ben Cardin, the most senior Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So now they're openly bragging about the control that Germany has over the EU. And of course, that has been the case from the very beginning. When we looked at the responses to what had happened to Brexit last Friday, it was a very harsh and cold response from Germany, whereas other states, heads like Italy, Greece and others would say, well, let's see if we can't work something out, do something with this. And even German businessmen were saying it would be foolish to try to punish Great Britain. And yet that's what we see coming from the United States, coming from Germany. We had Obama go over there and tell them essentially, you guys are going to be in the back of the bus. And they didn't really care what Obama said. He's not going to be the one writing the trade agreements. But here's another one. Alan Greenspan. Oh, there's a big difference between Republicans and Democrats, isn't there? Remember, Alan Greenspan was the head of the private Federal Reserve from Reagan to George H.W. Bush through the Clinton years and even into most of W's regime, all the way up to 2006. He was the chair of the private Fed. Here's what he had to say about Brexit. He said, the UK's government miscalculated in agreeing to schedule this referendum in the first place, he said. He said they underestimated the desperation among the electorate. But he said this desperation is hardly unique to the United Kingdom. He said it would be foolish to overlook it in places like the United States, even if no one wishes to politically discuss this, because it's politically very difficult to discuss. He said what we see is a desperate population out there. We're seeing it everywhere. We see it in the United States. You can see it all during our election period. It's a fear. It's a desperation. And here's the issue, folks. Can they take Project Fear? Can they make you fear independence and self-government more than you fear the serfdom of turning over your country to unelected bureaucrats and technocrats that will rule you? Again, we see George Will coming out and saying, well, I can't do it. I'm leaving the Republican Party. He said, we're just going to have to make sure that Trump loses and Hillary wins. We need to grit our teeth for 4 years while Hillary is there, and then hope we can win the White House, okay? What caused George Will to go out? Was it Obamacare? No, he didn't have a problem with that. Was it the open borders? No, he didn't have a problem with that, or with Paul Ryan. Gun control? No. Surveillance state? No. The unconstitutional war on drugs? None of that bothered George Will. No, what bothered him was the fact that Donald Trump, he said, called a judge who is part of La Raza, who is openly biased against Donald Trump, and called him out for that. That was a thing that triggered George Will, according to George Will. Now look at what else is going to be happening, because we understand that if Donald Trump gets elected, his biggest opponent is going to be Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House. He's going to be the one who is going to try to keep the borders open. That has been the central issue of Paul Ryan his entire career. But also now Marco Rubio has come back in and re-entered the Senate race, which he said he wasn't going to run in. But he says if elected, that's going to be what he is going to be most focused on. If re-elected to the Florida Senate, he says, he will make the two most controversial pieces of Donald Trump's agenda, his immigration policy and his proposal to ban Muslims from traveling to the United States, his central issues that he will oppose. Now, of course, it is not a comprehensive ban. What Donald Trump said is, we need to understand who these people are. We need to vet them. And of course, we hear that in the gun control cries. We need to have background checks. Oh, but not on people who could be terrorists coming in. Only on you who grew up in this country. You're the ones who need the background checks, not the people that we're bringing in massive numbers. But it turns out that Marco Rubio has an opponent. Once he came back into the race, the people who were in the primaries all bowed out except for one person. And this one person looks remarkably like Donald Trump. This is a millionaire, Carlos Baruf. He has endorsed Trump for president. He's espoused some of the same controversial beliefs, according to The Hill. And they both have an common ally in Florida Governor Rick Scott. And this is what he said in a statement on Friday, the guy who's running against Marco Rubio, Baruf. He says, the voters of Florida can re-elect Washington's candidate, who has consistently failed to do the job they hired him to do and won't commit to serving a full 6-year term, or they can make a change. Do you want a senator who puts politics and their own ambition first, or do you want a senator who puts Florida first? He is, they say he's a 58-year-old real estate developer, and he says this. He says, the experts want me to read a bunch of political crap off of this teleprompter. Here's what I have to say. Obama is a disaster, and Washington politicians are worthless. How about we try to take our country back and put America first? And that's precisely what we need. We need somebody like that. We don't need someone like Marco Rubio, who betrayed conservative voters who put him in, who became part of the Gang of Eight, and now, even though he denied it throughout the presidential race, says that his first priority is going to be to block Donald Trump on immigration, along with Speaker Paul Ryan, if he is reelected. Now, just to understand how precarious our freedoms are, Take a look at this article about the control of our transportation. We talk about this frequently, about how autonomous cars and the efforts of Google and Uber are really to take control of our transportation system.